I am here with Brian Allen Carr. Hi, Brian.
Hey, how's it going?
Otherwise known as BAC.
Sometimes.
That's that's how you signed my book, actually. This one.
Yeah, it is. That is how I sign all the books because it's easy. It's like there's not,
Yeah, I like
and I
it.
don't, I don't have a cool signature like my whole name, so I just do
Yeah, BAC. It's cool. The legendary
that.
BAC.
Jeez,
um,
yikes.
so just to preface this conversation for people who are, watching us talk about a book, um, I met you at the AWP conference in Seattle. And that was like my first con, if you can believe it or not. I mean, I went to Merrimack, um, the Merrimack Book Festival in October prior to that. But this was like the first like 3-day long thing that I've gone
That's
to.
right.
Yeah, I drove from Tacoma to Seattle every day for 4 days because I helped Christoph at Clash Books like set up.
Hmm.
So 45 minutes on on the freeway to Seattle, and then hung out like every day. And I got to see Stephen Graham Jones in a panel with Danielle Trussoni
Oh, how
and
fun.
Sylvia Moreno Garcia, which I was really excited about.
Hmm.
And then I got to meet so many cool people that stopped by the Clash booth. And then I got to meet you, and we talked about our love of Jeremy Robert Johnson.
He's a good dude. He's a good dude and a great writer.
He's a
Yeah,
great dude.
yeah.
And then then we started emailing back and forth, and I read Brian's book, The Last Horror Novel. The last horror novel before
In the
he
history,
literally just told me to
in the history of the world,
in
it's
the
a long,
history
it's a
of the
long
world.
title. I think Cameron Pierce, who ran Lazy Fascist, came up with that title. So
No,
it's long.
no, the reason why it's a good title, and I just fuck it up because I'm terrible at like the arrangement of all the words. I know all the words that are in there, I just like trying to piece them all together. But it's a great title because it goes with what happens in the novel or the novella that I like figured it out after I finished reading it. I was like, that's why it's called that.
It's funny because I think so that was kind of I did two like on spec books for Lazy Fastest where they kind of came up with the idea and then I wrote the book. And on that
Yeah.
one it was supposed to be like more traditional horror caricatures like vampires and zombies, but I did it all with kind of like South Texas kind of stuff. And then yeah, and because of that it became like this like different kind of argument, right? I think for the book. But
Yeah.
then
Yeah. I
but then
mean,
yeah, so like there's this like finality to it. I don't know.
well, it kind of for me, so Jeremy Robert Johnson knows that I love horror, obviously. So he was like, "Oh, I was like, which book should I read?" And I had all of your books, and he said, "Definitely start with that one since you like horror." And I was so surprised that it had the Legend of La Llorona in it.
Mhm.
Um,
Yeah.
and then it is like sort of an apocalyptic folklore. I mean, it just
Mhm.
has like all the things in it. And then it just has these relatable people who that's what cracked me up and how it goes with the title of the book is like all this epic shit is happening, but like some people are just kind of like, whatever, like
Mhm.
we're just gonna go to the gas
Just
station and eat our food and have sex and not worry about what's going on.
full on nihilism, man. Just like fucking whatever.
Yeah, that's
I,
exactly how that felt. It was
that's not
good.
how I think about it. I try to be less nihilistic than that, but I could definitely see an undercurrent of nihilism in lots of stuff.
Yeah, yeah, and then too, if you guys want to read more of Brian Allen Carr's work, he has Opioid Indiana and SIP, which I think I might dive into next, considering that we just read The Strange, and I'm in this vibe now.
The Strange is super good. It's a super good weird Western. It's really nice.
Yeah. Brian, talk to me about like your initial reading experience. Like, tell me about how you felt like 1 to 2 chapters in. Like, what were you picking up?
He's very good. Well, so 1 to 2 chapters in, he frames the story really, really well, right? So, like,
Yeah.
first chapter, it does a very good job of like, it's not an info dump, right? But he kind of just peppers you gently towards this idea of he's got a lot to explain. He does it very beautifully, very like
Right.
smoothly. And I think, yeah, I mean, I think from jump, you're in this really great notion of being in a Western on Mars, and you're uh, in the hands of a really admirable storyteller. Like he clearly
Yeah.
cares about telling a story, and that's like nice, right? And it's framed that way. And he talks about other books pretty early on, as if like he hints at the homage of it. Well, really, like at the very beginning, there's that Ray Bradbury quote, right? Or at
Yeah.
least it was in my edition.
Yeah, no, I noticed that too. And of course, a lot of the blurbs are referencing, you know, the Bradbury style, and the True Grit style. So early on, I had expectations, but also like Nathan Ballingrud is one of my favorite short story uh, fiction writers. So
Mm-hmm.
I kind of knew going into it what he's capable of, which I would say like his magic is that he has like really accessible prose where you just kind of fall into the rhythm of the story, and start seeing that movie in your mind because you're not tripping over like overly complicated writing style. Um, you know, it's like super accessible and compelling right away, and the characters are, you know, really true to life. And so that I noticed that like right away, like, oh, this is going to be something I just fall into and start binge reading.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's not super purple prose. It's like really, really matter of fact and straightforward. But then, like, there's quite a few beautiful sentences throughout. But it's not like
Yeah.
beautiful because it's acrobatic. It's more beautiful because of the logic or the statement of it a little bit. Yeah.
Yeah,
Um,
he'll leave you with like a line either like right in the middle of some
mhm,
dialogue or like a thought right at the end,
mhm.
that makes you jump into the next chapter. Have you
Mhm.
read any of Nathan's work before, or was this your
So,
first?
no, I definitely have read a few of the short stories, and I was actually looking around for my copy of North America. It's North American Lake Monsters, correct?
Oh,
And,
yeah.
but I couldn't find it because I was going to read like one or two, stories as a refresher. I think that came out in
Yeah.
like 12 or 13. I definitely remember I remember the office I was in when I read it. Do you know what I'm saying? So like,
Oh,
but
yeah.
it was a bit ago, and it's been a minute since I read some of those stories. But like I knew. I remembered his style, but I don't. I mean, he's super cinematic, and I remember thinking when I heard that book was being adapted, I was like, "Oh yeah, that makes sense."
Oh, yeah, definitely. Like, so I think my first Nathan Ballingrud story was The Visible Filth, which was in his Wounds
Okay,
collection.
I don't know that book. I definitely have not read that one.
Yeah, and they adapted that for Hulu, and I was like, "There's no fucking way I'm gonna watch that." Like, I think that a
Mm,
lot in my mind. Like, after I read a story, like, that is really cinematic, I always think, like, I would never watch this, like, as an adaptation because it would just haunt me for the rest of my days. Like, just he has
Too
those
much.
visuals. Yeah, it's
Yeah.
too much. Like, I have my own visuals that I can kind of tap it down a little bit and like not let it blow up into something that's going to give me full on nightmares, but like a director gets involved
Mm.
and all of a sudden they're showing me stuff that like I wouldn't think for myself, you know?
So, so you'll knowingly read a scarier book
Yeah.
than watch a scarier movie. That's interesting. I don't. I I don't know. I like horror films. There's definitely a type of horror novel that I'm not as interested in. I'm not a huge slasher novel fan, but I like slasher films.
Oh, that is
So
interesting.
yeah, and I tend to like kind of more true story horror stuff in film format more than in book format. And I like so. Like Mothman Prophecies, love the movie, don't like
Yeah.
any of the books that I've read in that
Yeah.
vein, if that makes sense. And I
Yeah,
think it's
no, that
kind of the same thing where like if it's a little too heady, I'll get like rather than scared not paranoid, like whatever. I start thinking about like horror stuff too much.
yeah.
If it's a book and a film, if I can digest it, then it might linger for a few days. But if I'm reading it as a book and it's like, true horror or whatever, then it'll fuck with me.
Yeah, we're totally the opposite because it's like the
Yeah.
movie visuals, I cannot get those out of my head, but like a book, I can put it down and then not think about it again.
I yeah, I get it. I think
So,
I'm a little more audio. I think so. Like all lines will
yeah,
kind of run through my head over and over again, or stuff
yeah.
like that. Images
Yeah,
not as much, I don't guess.
I mean, it's interesting because I saw this book come out, right? And Nathan Ballingrud did warn me. He was like, "It's not horror, so you might not want to
Mhm.
read it," because I do just strictly read a lot of horror.
Sure.
But he said it does have like horror elements in it, and I totally think it does have horror elements in it. Like, what did
Yeah,
you think?
yeah. I mean, I'd say more so than say like I think one of the comparisons was, if not from somebody else in my head, Mad Max, which I think the newest Mad Max would be a kind of horror film.
I think so
And
too.
I think the definition of horror continues to broaden too.
Yeah,
Though I say that and like it's always been pretty wide ranging what it can encompass. And I would say this for a variety of different reasons would have elements of horror. There's
yeah.
reanimation and there's ghosts. There's hella ghosts in
Yeah, there's so those. Like,
it.
what did you told me in the email when we were writing back and forth, you were like, "Haunted robots is hella baller,"
Dude, who the fuck
or you
thinks?
said
I mean,
something like that.
that's a good idea. Like, it's presented a couple different ways because at first it's like you don't have a lot of background information on it, and so the people who would come to that conclusion that it's just haunted robots makes a ton of sense. And then you get this kind of additional uh, fungus based kind of discussion of it too, which is like
Yeah,
I don't that's it's fun. I mean, those are the two, and it's nice how it presents itself over the course of the novel because the novel will kind of give you these folklore kind of things or like old wives' tales variations, and then as it progresses, you get more of a scientific underpinning. Not the science of it is not like a million percent, but he even says, and I want to say the acknowledgement or something that somebody at a point in time told him to eschew a little bit of the science logic in writing it, and it's good that he did. But it definitely the
yeah.
ideas progress from like wives' tale to like science kind of. I like it. It's neat.
Well, and it's funny because I don't typically gravitate towards science fiction. Like, I
Mhm.
don't really like it, and I think it's mostly because it has, like, such a strong learning curve. Like, you have to retain a lot of information to, like, figure
Mhm.
out how everything works. And so it makes sense that you kind of were not concerned, but you were thinking about, like, the timeline of events and, like, what was
Yeah.
going on Earth versus what's going on Mars. And so, like, we can just kind of tell the audience, like, what this basic premise is there's, like, a young girl who is operating a diner on Mars, and the people in this like established area, this like habitat, they're stranded basically on Mars, and there's not a way really to get back home. And then um, some people come into the diner, and there's some there's a situation that happens there where some things are stolen from the diner, and the girl wants to get those back. That's like the short of it. Like, there's a lot of other things happening, but the short of it is she kind of has to, because her father winds up not being able to do this journey for himself. So she has to kind of like go out into the outskirts of where she's living to where there's like other people. And she has to like travel there. And I'm trying to like not be spoilery, but like you were saying, the people who are living on Mars have a very specific timeline on Earth, basically, right? Like you were saying, there was Native Americans. There's a reference of like Native Americans living there.
Just one, from what I remember, that I saw,
One or
and it was
two.
one or two.
Yeah.
I don't know. Definitely. So, and it was done within the discussion of like how many more people had ventured out from Earth to Mars and what the timelines were. So, I think, and again, I didn't like do a whole chronology as I was reading it, right? But most of it, the settlement of Mars starts in like the late 1800s, right? And then you kind of see when Earth and Mars are in communication with each other. There's elements that like uh, fit into that kind of whole like stuff going on Earth, same stuff going on Mars. So, for instance, there's a baseball team that comes and visits, and they're
Oh,
like
yeah.
they're a Negro League baseball team from back home, right?
Right.
And so right like so it stays consistent with like what's happening on Earth in terms of Earth's history, but of course Mars's history is for Nathan to tell us.
Yeah, which is really interesting because it does have different vibes going on. Like it does feel like a Western on Mars, but it also has that like 50s vibe because
Yeah,
of the
the
diner
diner and yeah.
and the baseball league thing felt kind of 50s.
It's
Um,
kind of an Americana settlement, not unlike Ray Bradbury's Mars and the Martian Chronicles. I think,
right.
right? It's a very similar like MAGA Americana. You know what I mean? Like
Yes.
white picket fences type crap. And they even there's some references made to like how disparity on Earth followed over to Mars and stuff like that too. But yeah, definitely it feels like if Annabelle Crisp was in high school, she'd be a member of the Greasers, right? You know, like from the Outsiders. And
Yeah.
that's kind of how it feels, yeah.
Yeah, and how much do
Or like
you love
Scout.
her?
Oh, she's great.
I
That's a
love
great
her
character.
character too. Like Annabelle Crisp is like
Yeah,
a new female protagonist to love and to add to like our collection of like badass, sassy young girls.
yeah. I think that's kind of the biggest homage to True Grit is like this idea
Yeah.
of like this fearless young lady who's got to go do some shit because these dudes couldn't handle it. Which is, I mean, that's the gist of True Grit, right? Is like she finds herself a drunk to help her go fucking
Yeah.
adventure, And it's a very
Yep.
now this is more layered though in that like she does go adventuring and she goes adventuring with a robot, a man and a woman, right? So like whereas in True Grits it's just like I think it's three dudes and her. Right. So it's a little bit of a different kind of uh, a more Wizard of Oz kind of conglomeration of people. They're all a
Yeah.
little different.
Yeah, it's funny that you mentioned Wizard of Oz because did you ever see that weird movie Return to Oz?
TikTok. Did you prick TikTok for dude?
That's who I was picturing for Watson.
Me too.
Totally.
100%. We talked. My kids and I talked about it last night. We were
Oh my
talking about
god. That
or not
movie's
last night. Yeah,
so I mean, that's a
here it
horror
is.
movie too, right?
100%. Well, there's that
100%.
there's the queen who has like all those heads and the
Yeah.
wheelers. My wife's
Yeah.
hearing me talk about it in the other room. She's like,
Yeah,
It's,
the Wheelers were so scary, and, like, anyway, I don't wanna go too off into the weeds, but
no,
I was
that movie fucked people up. Yeah, for sure. It
yeah,
was good.
yeah, it's so good. I love watching it, and I totally pictured TikTok for Watson because he's
Mhm.
kind of round and shiny and has that, like, funny personality. Yeah.
The British kind of cadence, yeah.
I mean,
Which
I
is
just
like
have to say, like
it's another really great part of this book is like how differentiated all the characters are through dialogue, right? Because like
yes.
Watson definitely sounds so robot British, you know.
Robot British. Yeah, totally. Like I loved the whole part of the world building where those cylinders that they have that can go into machines and everything are what gives the machines like a personality. Um,
Mhm,
because I mean, I don't know what it is, but like I always fall in love with robots. Like, like I think it's just from like Short Circuit, like
mhm,
growing up in that time frame and watching Short Circuit, and then just falling in love with any robot really that shows up in our movies or our stories, like C3PO, and
mhm,
we just kind of have this thing for AI that acts like
mhm.
people, and
Well,
so
and like it's one of those weird things where right, society will give you the thing arts will give you the thing that you're supposed to be thinking about ahead of about 30 years before you actually have to be fucking with it, right? Because
yeah,
it's about to get real,
yeah, I
and I
know. We
love
were just
and I
talking about it,
But I
right?
think you're right, like yeah, exactly, with the writers thing,
Hmm.
and, like, what AI will and won't be able to produce for us and what it'll be able to take away. Yeah, it's creepy, really.
Which is
But,
well,
like
it's weird because we create it, right? We're the one we've created this thing, and then I think the fear is like, will the thing then try to replace us? Or I mean, what's the fear?
yeah, and then I think even the more immediate fear is that we're not gonna know what we're dealing like, if anything happens on the screen, you won't be able to default believe that it is actually true. Right.
Right.
I think that's the bigger immediate fear is like, because it seems like AI is pretty good at like everything's wonky now. They just showed this weird pizza commercial that it just made, but like that Drake Weekend song sounded like Drake Weekend. So I
Yeah.
think that's the more immediate fear is like what is it that we're seeing? And then two, I worry with books is it's like if you're not 100% certain it was produced by a human being, will you still read it the same way? Do you know what I
Right.
mean? Like, I don't know, because one of the biggest arguments for reading books right now is spending time in the imagination of the human being who produced it.
Yeah.
But you won't be able to know anymore. So I don't know if it'll make like books before, like now, more trustworthy, which is another kind
Yeah.
of eerie thing. I don't know. We'll see.
Well, I mean, that's kind of the theme of the book too. I mean,
It is. I mean, mhm,
it is. It's so weird because there's robots or AI that are on Mars who've kind of gone rogue and are like doing their own thing, and then humans are serving the AI. Like
mhm.
towards the end of the book, there are people who kind of worship the AI, if that's not going too far into the details, but
Yeah, I mean, and I think that's the fear of here on Earth too, is that the AI will become some type of god. Like, how will you question it? It'll know everything, right?
yeah. And it's eternal, right?
Yeah,
Like
I mean, and
we're
yeah, in
not.
theory, no, no. I
No.
mean, other than the information that is us is, I guess. I don't know. I mean, do you ever read any like quantum physics shit or anything like that? And
No
like
way,
just
man. No.
don't.
No, that's like too up in my
there's
head. I
there's
can't.
this
No.
there's this really good book by this really smart guy named Carlo Rovelli, and it's called "The Universe Is Not What It Seems." You know about like how quantum gravity informs a lot of things that work in life, and like how time functions. And yeah, don't read it; it'll mess you up.
Yeah, no. I feel like my head is full of
Sometimes
like
Sometimes I
Go
get
ahead.
really high and email Carlo Ravelli to try to get him to explain stuff to me, but he doesn't answer. Dear
He's
Carlo,
like, no.
guys, I fucked this motherfucker. It's fair.
Yeah, you're like, never mind. I got it out anyway.
No, it was for me, not him. He's not even
Yeah.
real, really. Based on his theories, if he's outside by now, he actually might be responding to them, but I'm just getting him in a different dimension. You know, as you would.
Yeah, as you would. I mean, again, that's right tied into our book, The Strange by Nathan Ballingrud. I mean, I don't know if
Interdimensional for
horror
sure.
fans, yeah, if horror fans are kind of avoiding it because they feel like it's literary or they feel like it's, some kind of contemporary fiction or it's not in your genre wheelhouse. I think that this is like the book that crosses all different kinds of genres and boundaries. Like it would be hard pressed to put this in any one category because it is sort of the weird Western meets sci-fi meets kind of like historical fiction, and then also like, I don't know, it's just kind of like a heartwarming kind of tale too.
Yeah, there's more humanity in it than a lot of books. I would say vibe-wise, for people who like horror, like, I would say that the book that kind of fits, that was a good crossover, was Annihilation by Jeff Vandermeer. I
Oh
would
yeah,
say
that's perfect.
vibe-wise, in terms of like horror, you know what I mean? Crossover, and maybe
Yeah,
even a little more so than that because there's ghosts and stuff. But even there's some similar elements in it too with fungus and stuff. But it's a lot less. Um, there's a lot more humanity in it, I'd say, in that the character interfaces are less informed by the weirdness of the world. Like, it's a weird
right.
book and it's a weird world, but they stay very human inside of it. At least the humans, if that
Yeah,
makes
and
sense.
the conflict stays human too.
Mhm.
Like